Today we are talking about the Me Too phenomena. The title for today is Making Sense of Me Too, and this is a very potent and controversial subject, but a very important one. And so Dani, here we are with an unscheduled, well, not unscheduled, unscripted dialogue with something pretty edgy. This is my second opportunity to have a dialogue with you, so thank you for proposing this one. I remember you saying that you were getting a lot of questions from readers and followers of your work to write on this or discuss this, and that kind of prompted our conversation around having this conversation. We've had a conversation about having this conversation.
Right.
That's how edgy it is. So I'm wondering, where would you like to start with this? Like, what seems the best starting point? Or are we just going to circle around it because it's really so scary?
Right. We'll just like kind of sideways glances out of the corner of our eye. I was thinking all day, like, where do we even start with this? It seems like such a big, messy bear of a subject. One place, I don't even know if this is a way in, but let's try it because it feels sort of safer, is that I noticed when the Me Too thing hit the news and social media and whatnot, it has sort of a largesse and an intensity and a volatility that seems to have sort of informed the dialogues I'm engaging about it. It seems like people are really riled, and a lot of what I'm seeing is women holding I'm the marginalized victim and men are the evil perpetrators, and it's very sort of cut and dry, black and white, and that just feels fundamentally disempowering to even take that stance, because if I'm just an unwitting victim to someone else's awfulness, there's not really anything I can do. So my perspective on this is like, okay, if we live in a reality forged of equal and opposite forces, if the masculine is somehow distorted, then the feminine is necessarily equally distorted to balance it out. So where can I adjust to help us back into balance? Because one thing that hasn't been sitting right with me in this conversation is, men, fix yourselves, women are flawless and we'll just sit here until you get it together. And this is like, no, this is all of us humans need to sort of figure out the right alchemy of masculine, healthy feminine energy, and sort of find our way to this together.
Well, I think that's a good starting point. I mean, that's a big part of this is it's very volatile right now. I mean, in our initial conversations around this, I said I'm very much staying out of the fray of the conversation because it's so volatile. And one of the observations I've made, that ties into what you just said, is that on the men's side, there are a lot of people who are feeling very defensive, and so there's that counter reaction of the pendulum is swinging so far in the other direction that there's then that other reaction against that. So there's so many pushbacks on either side right now. But it's tricky. I mean, I personally, as a man, have not wanted to jump into that dialogue with that volatility, but for two reasons. One is that pendulum swing. It's a correction. It's an energetic correction, and we tend to not evolve in a very clean way. We tend to evolve in spurts, and it seems to me like, the positive of the Me Too, even with anything that anyone might feel like is an overreaction or too much or too far in one direction, what it has done, it's opened the floodgates. It's shifted the dialogue to a different side but it doesn't stop there. It keeps moving. And I mean, I think that's where, a lot of the things that you have to say on this and things that you're concerned about are about how do we bring the pendulum back more to the center so there can be a dialogue and some progressive co-responsibility in how we do this, how we change this, how we move forward. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it, because I think one of the downsides of patriarchy is that it creates this lens through which we see that's very masculine driven. So it's very black, white, good, bad. It doesn't hold the paradox. It doesn't hold the nuances. Right. And we all need to evolve out of patriarchy. We're all in this together. And so it is, I don't think there's ever going to be a this is the right way and this is the right structure. I think that for us to come into right relationship with the polarities and to shift from patriarchy into a more integrated, sustainable way or structure, it's going to take constant shifts and constant dialogues and an ability to listen to one another and reflect. And it does seem like one of the pieces that I'm seeing, there are so many aspects and so many ways we can go, is that, right after the Harvey Weinstein thing broke and things were really at a very loud, not that they're any softer now, but I know that Donna Karen came out and said, well, I think maybe women might want to start looking at how they're presenting themselves and take a little responsibility. And she was super lambasted and took the tweet down, and there was, boycott Donna Karen and this and that. And I feel like that's one valid piece of the puzzle, is that we're living in the West. It's highly, highly sexualized culture through advertising, through media, through fashion, through the way that women are presenting themselves. And it does seem to be riling up that particular aspect of men. And whether it's right or wrong, and women, should be able to wear whatever they want, there are consequences to all of our actions. And, and I think web porn is a piece of that as well, is that, and I'm not lobbying for burqas. And at the same time, I do think we need to acknowledge, this isn't working. There is an overstimulation that's happening, and you can't rile up the tiger with raw meat and then shame it for being a tiger, So this is one tiny piece where I'm okay, can we, where can I as a woman take responsibility, start to examine where I might be contributing to this?
Well, and those are all incredibly valid points that, like you said, I mean, a lot of people aren't willing to really even discuss right now. I mean, it's so volatile. But in relation to that, because I think, well, what I want to ask is the aspect of timing around when we can talk about certain things. I mean, to shift to different examples. I mean, sometimes when something is so intense, whether it be an individual experiencing something intense or a collective thing, there's a timing issue of when is it going to work to have a conversation about something that's different than the kind of space someone is in initially. I mean, there's a shock, right? Certain things can cause shock. And when you're in that state of shock, having a certain kind of conversation is not going to work. But even just playing on this idea of well, what happens when you have shock, right? It's incapacitating your ability to perform at a high level, right? So there's a biochemical element. But even coming back to what you said about web porn, I mean, we're in a society now where boys and girls, but particularly the boys are able to access pornography on their smartphones, and they're 10, 11, 12, right?
Right.
And the research shows that it's highly, highly stimulating to the dopamine system, and it's so powerfully stimulating, and the consequence is so severe that there's a higher, an you know, an enormously higher rate of erectile dysfunction amongst teenage boys now, because the cycle of dopamine stimulation it has a diminishing returns, so that you keep, you know, hitting that dopamine receptor in that way. I mean, you have to then increase the dose. It's not only distorting your hormonal system, it's now affecting the subconscious, it's affecting psychology, what you're used to seeing, how much stimulation, how much variety you need. But they're actually, you know, there's a higher rate of teenagers and young men in their 20s that can't sexually perform with an actual woman. I mean, that's a very, very real consequence. Now, that's, you know, on the sexual and the physical side, but, you know, we haven't even talked about the emotional impact. Boys don't have to learn how to approach a girl to ask her on a date, right? You know, like, there's a disconnect, you know, where it's so much in a fantasy world and so much in a two-dimensional visual world, and that people are not knowing how to relate, you know. So there are so many problems on so many levels.
Yeah.
You know, where do we even go with this?
No, I agree. And yeah, like, even in this moment, I'm like, there's so many places to go with all these things that you just said. And, you know, bookmarking the timing piece, which I do believe is relevant. You know, the web porn is absolutely having this effect on men. I do hands-on tantra work. I see it, you know, on the front lines all the time. I'm aware of it. But it's also our dating platforms like Tinder, which is, you know, the diversity, the flipping. Women aren't actually wired like that. So coming back to my initial thought about, well, where am I as a woman responsible? It's like, well, where are we as women signing on to things that are disempowering us and that aren't serving us? You know, men are more wired for dopamine means of sexual expression, where women are more wired for oxytocin, which is about security and safety. And when you're flipping right, left, I don't even know what it is, you know, when you're on that sort of dating platform that is about new and different and more in variety, well, that is meant to distort that masculine approach. It's meant to take that masculine means of approaching sexuality from a very base level and exacerbating that. And so that goes back to, like, well, women, why are we playing along with that? Why are we signing on to this? It doesn't work with the way our biology is wired.
Well, because even you know, taking that point, you know, coming back to the issue of what's going on with really, you know, young teenagers these days. I mean, it's just heartbreaking when you look at the amount of bullying and such that's going on towards young girls, you know, being pressured to send nude pictures of themselves to boys in their class or in their school.
But how does that work? Pressured to send? Like,
I don't.
What does that leap?
I mean, from what I understand, I mean, it has a lot to do with, you know, the desire to be liked and approved of, but it's, you know, playing into the need for approval, but in a very, you know, the requests are very distorted. But, you know, you think, like, where is the mentorship? Where is the guidance for both the boys and the girls? But my main point with that is that it's starting very early that girls and women are playing into what's expected of them from boys and men. And that's super unfortunate. But it does make me think of, like, you know, who is influencing and guiding them to some kind of another standard.
Exactly. Like, who's in charge? Who is guiding? Who's parenting? Who's mentoring these kids?
I don't know. I mean, I mean, I hope you have a notepad there. Just bookmark and make a note of all the other dialogues we can have. But I mean, you know, even coming up with a title for this, we kind of, I think we threw out like a dozen titles, but, you know, personally, I liked making sense of Me Too because it's hard to make sense of. There's so much, right? And so, I mean, even as we're having this dialogue, I mean, you know, I definitely feel we are meandering through the many, many minefields of topics and issues to explore. But I think just to pause for a moment, part of the purpose of this dialogue series is to not go in with an agenda of how we're going to talk about something or what the conclusion is going to be. Conversations at the edge. Okay, here we are. We're at this edge. This is pretty edgy. This is confusing. We all have some perspectives and ideas. And I mean, well, let's be honest, it's a fucking shitstorm out there in Facebook land and Twitter land of accusations and counter accusations, and people jumping in to defend a different point of view, and like it's just vicious.
It's super vicious, and I can feel like our tentativeness around it of like wanting to keep it safe. One thing that I want to speak to that
wait,
you just
hold on. There's like a shark in the water, and we're dipping our toe in it. I think we maybe have a good reason to be a little bit tentative, right?
But really, what are we afraid of? Pushback, comments, people not liking our ideas? I mean, what's the you're not going to jump down my throat right now, and call me a bad feminist, and I'm not going to scream at you as being a perpetrator of the patriarchy. But I mean, in having the few conversations that I've had, it's so freaky how triggered people are around it. Mm-hmm. But I do want to speak to a couple things that we have said already as we're in these tentative shark-infested waters.
Yeah.
Well, when you mentioned, these girls who are being pressured into sending nude pics, it does come back to like, what's going on with our collective self-esteem? What's going on with our empowerment as far as real empowerment, not as far as like me giving my power to Harvey Weinstein or Louis C.K. or XYZ, but like, how am I holding myself? Because, and granted, I'm not, I feel for all the tweens and kids who are growing up in this culture with the internet this way, but in the same way that I don't understand how anyone could force me to give them a blowjob, there are too many X factors as like, well, I have teeth and I could make my jaw go slack, or I could punch someone. Like, no one could force me to send them a naked picture. But I'm of a different time. But I do think there's this piece of completely am wanting to come back to my train of thought. So let's bookmark that particular piece of it.
Yeah, no,
but as far as the timing piece that started this off, and like, when is it okay, to step in and be heard? And I get it. Like, emotions are so high that maybe now isn't the time for like sane, logical, rational conversation. At the same time, I do see a lot of damage being done. And especially I see a lot of men internalizing this sort of bad perpetrator identity. And I do see a lot of men around me getting more sheepish and more meek and like silencing their voices. And that concerns me, because I don't think we need men more meek or more quiet. And as far as like, my own sort of conspiracy theory associations behind why Me Too got so loud and so big so fast, I am concerned about a clamping down on men's own empowerment and men's voices. And I do see that happening, and that while we're waiting for the waters to sort of calm down to be able to speak to it, men are shrinking, and that concerns me.
Well, let me speak to that a little bit, because there's some interesting things that come up around that. And I think I shared with you at some point that one of the reasons why, like, I'm not staying out of the fray from the point of view that I want to be there. I'm not feeling drawn to it, because when I'm seeing these posts, where women might be expressing, pretty intense point of view about men in terms of all the horrific things that are going on, I don't think they're talking about me, because they're not referring to me. They're referring to gender in a very general way, and they're referring to some very specific cases, whether it's the public ones or their own stories. So it's not about me. But it's interesting that I think part of the process that is going on, there is a shrinking happening for a lot of men because they feel targeted. But part of the reason that's happening is they identify with their gender. And
yeah, I hear. I'm sorry.
And it's not that we shouldn't identify with it. I mean, obviously, that kind of ties into that topic of like, you know, white privilege. I mean, I don't think about white privilege, but I am white. So I'm not saying I don't have white privilege. I just don't think of it. And likewise, I am a man, but I don't really think about that so much. I don't consciously think, you know, like identify so much that if someone is talking about men, I suddenly feel triggered as if it's about me. But I also don't feel that if people talk about white privilege or white men, I don't get triggered by that because that's not my primary sense of self. And I think, you know, you were talking earlier about the self-esteem issue. If our self-esteem is derived from some secondary sense of identity, right, you know, then it can be threatened. And I think right now, people's sense of identity is threatened, and that's a big part of it. But on both sides, things are being, you know, how we are attached to identity is being reshaped. And a lot of the ways that identity gets reshaped is it breaks down first before it can arise in a new, healthier way. So although it's really unfortunate what's happening in some way, there are other parts of it that are incredibly fortunate. I mean, overall, the floodgate of all of this, these Me Too revelations coming to light is incredibly good because it's like the transparency, it's just like opened up and people are emboldened to share their stories. I mean, I even just today saw, you know, a friend in Los Angeles post, and he was a child actor. And it's actually a fairly big story because of how high profile the show was. And he called out one of the senior actors in that show. And you know, since I'm connected with him personally, I'm seeing what he's saying to his friends personally, and you know, just sharing that how scared he was to finally say this publicly and be, you know, have it called out publicly, and really just asking for a lot of love and support from his friends because there's going to be pushback. Now he's going to be thrust into the public limelight around this particular issue of what happened to him as a child actor. You know, I don't know even where I was going with that, but it's like there's a lot of personal, you know, I see a lot of personal stories pop up, and I have so much compassion for, you know, whether it's women or men sharing their stories. But the good of it is that there's a lot of emboldened people able to share their stories finally. That I think is so good.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, it's like the evolutionary process for us individually is messy. It's messy collectively. And one of the things I shared with you is like, how do we look at not just what's happening in the moment of each kind of detail of what's happening, but the larger and longer arc. We talked about that a little bit, and that's, I think, for me, where I think both the reason I kind of stay out of the fray and also look at the timing of it is like, when is it the right time to really discuss the longer arc of this? Because I don't want to actually get out there and say, well, you shouldn't be doing this because it's having this adverse reaction, but more like, you know, this first action is causing a reaction and it's causing a counter reaction, but there's an arc. There's a longer arc. Something is changing. And it looks good and it looks bad. It looks scary. It looks like, how the hell is this going to work out? All at the same time.
Yeah, I think there's so many pieces here. So the longer arc is the return of the divine feminine, which I do want to go into because I think that most people reference that and don't understand what that is. So I want to bookmark that and just speak to some other things that you mentioned. And as far as men becoming quieter and more meek, I don't think it's about the people who aren't identified and just pulling out. Because similar to you, like, I'm not triggered by the harassment and the Me Too thing. I don't have any energy on it, which is part of the reason why I stayed quiet when everyone was telling their stories. I was like, I don't really need to do this. It's not that I don't have stories of harassment. It's that I'm not identified with them and I'm not disempowered by them. And I never gave my power to them. So there's no need for me to go like trudging them up from the annals of my memories just to play along. And I don't fault anyone for doing that. It's just not my piece of it. But like I had a client who was referencing a specific issue with his father that triggered him. And then he said, I mean, if I can use that word, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. And I was like, what? Like, what are we even talking about? And he's like, well, I know women, you know, have so many bigger triggers right now. And it was so heartbreaking to see that in the face of this Me Too thing and this trigger thing, I guess, that he didn't feel comfortable owning his own trauma. That's not working. That's not helping the situation. That's not helping anyone. That's not helping us come into a balanced relatedness with healthy masculine and masculine shadows in the same way of healthy feminine and healthy shadows. And I think as far as the larger conversation, this is what we're coming to, is what does the return of the divine feminine mean? And it doesn't mean slapping a vagina on the patriarchy and saying it's fixed.
Right.
And it doesn't mean demonizing anyone, you know. You said, and I know you were citing someone else, that we're all victims of patriarchy. And I think, you know, one of the 9 million pieces in minefields right now is in reading a lot of people's stories of Weinstein or other famous people or not even famous people. I hear a lot of women talk about being harassed or approached in a way that feels uncomfortable and freezing, right? And not knowing what to say. And I've certainly been there, and I've had that experience. And the thing is that the one thing that I think we're all getting is that this behavior from men is not new at all. And it's also not going away. It's not like, that's just part of it. In the same way that feminine shadows like gossip, backbiting, you know, bitchiness, whatever, are also not going away. We all have our shadows. It's just learning to work with them. And so one piece that I'm seeing is like, you know, you and I talked about the shirts, the future is female, which I'm really not into, because the future isn't female. It's not a specific gender expression, and the future isn't even feminine. The future is integrated, and that's a constant dance.
Right. But that T-shirt isn't as sexy though. The future is integrated.
So not sexy.
I'm sorry, it's not going to sell.
And every time I see that T-shirt, my Aquarian mind just goes to every little boy who sees that T-shirt and thinks, "Oh, so the future doesn't include me," and then creating a whole generation of trauma and divisiveness, and it's a mess. But if the future is female, which it isn't, but if we are going to move into a more balanced iteration of power, then we women need to learn to not freeze in the face of the masculine sexual shadow. We need to learn to work on it. And that's one of the pieces that I'm seeing is, to work with it, is that how many of us have given our power away and frozen and we're freaked out, and we need to learn how to say no to that. How to not give our power away to that. That to me seems like a glaring lesson right now, because telling men to not, you know, get sexually riled up and abuse that is ridiculous. You know, like it's.
Well, you know, and just to address that for a second, I mean, you know, I can understand that people say, you know, when they focus on how do we stop the behavior, but I can understand that that's where people's minds go, but you know, that becomes a controlling and punitive approach. I mean, much like we have the prison system and legal system we have here. It's, you know, bad things happen and then you punish it.
Right.
But it's not a corrective system. It's not, you know, a system in which, you know, we should more importantly be looking at, you know, what are we teaching young boys and girls, right? You know, like That's not a field I'm in, but I don't have children, but I have friends that do have children, and I so admire, the parents who are amazing parents with their girls or with their boys. And, I love seeing that, and we need to see more of that. That's where it starts. But yeah, the Harvey Weinsteins, it's like it's like that ugly mold on the top of it, right? It's not the cream rising to the top. It's that ugly, toxic mold that's risen to the top.
Right.
So we're looking at that and going, this is terrible. We need to cut it away. But
it's not realistic. It's not going to happen.
Well,
we're not going to cut it away. It's like, how many women were put in that position by Weinstein and then pandered to it and disempowered themselves.
Right.
And then that feeds it.
Right. And what I was going to say is that, even if we were to be able to cut it away, if what is causing it isn't dealt with, it will just keep happening. Right. So, we're cutting away the effect, but the cause isn't so much being looked at. And, I guess one of the things about Hollywood is the thing that I can't even use this word because it's not really fair to say it shocked me that people were so shocked. It's just more like, really? I wasn't ever really that deeply embedded in Hollywood, but I did spend 5 years in Los Angeles and was on the periphery of the industry. And none of this was news to anyone. No. It's like, it wasn't news to anyone whatsoever. No. We have been making jokes about the casting couch since the 20s. It's not a new phenomena. People were not unaware of it. People have been dancing around it in so many different ways. It was not even you can't even call it a secret. It's not even it's just out in the open. Everyone knew this was going on. Yeah. It just all of a sudden became time to punish people for what had always been going on.
Right.
The timing for all the men. It's not that they shouldn't be held accountable. That part really isn't in question, but it is questionable that it was shocking, because it wasn't shocking.
Well, and I think some of it is to be called into question, because there are so many right now. There's this like really intense public shaming, right? There's this intense like tsunami of judgment for how these people are allegedly behaving, but we don't really know. And there are instances like Harvey Weinstein where it does seem more cut and dry. And then there's the instance of like Louis C.K. where I read the apology letter and I'm like, I don't see this as a misuse of power, because I don't see fame as power. And as a woman, like, I'm not going to sign on to give my power away to some superior, inferior gestalt based on someone being famous. So I also think that like this is there are issues of power and where we're giving our power away. And I think some instance of the shock and outrage, even though I think the largesse is completely absurd, makes sense. And a lot of them don't make sense. And I think a lot of it is like jumping on this weird bandwagon. To what end, I'm not sure. But I'm of the belief that everything happens for us and for our growth. I think the universe is very kind and very consistent that way. And so if this is happening to so many women, if so many women have these Me Too stories, then I think it's for us to see, well, how do we learn to empower ourselves in the face of this energy? And if we are wanting more women in positions of power and we are wanting more feminine energy driving the ship, then we need to learn to empower ourselves to work with this energy instead of telling this energy to go away. Well,
so just to address the whole thing of if we want more women in power, what came to mind is that, seeing as what we have is a patriarchal structure, right? Even the structure of Hollywood in terms of how we define success. If we just leave the structures as is and encourage more women to rise to the top of that, we're not really going to have something that's that different.
Right.
I mean, not entirely. I mean, you look in politics, you know, like there are female politicians who are amazing, like, you know, Elizabeth Warren. But, you know, there's a structural problem in politics. There's a structural problem in our economy. There's a structural problem in Hollywood. You know, if our goals are not different, having different people seeking those same goals may not really make that much of a difference.
I completely agree. And I don't want to take us too off topic, but I do think that this is speaking to the issue of the patriarchal structure being an issue. Is, I know you posted today about Bitcoin, and everyone's posting about Bitcoin right now. And if you look at why people are stoked on Bitcoin, it's because there's a lot of money to be made right now at the forefront in a short period of time, which is a very masculine, patriarchal approach. It's not as far as like, well, is this a long-term sustainable, you know, best case scenario for the most amount of people situation? It's that patriarchal, masculine, I can get mine now thing. And so, yeah, it's this whole framing of everything that needs to be questioned versus like putting people with vaginas in positions in like inherently dysfunctional patriarchal structures.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, the Bitcoin thing, although that's a little, you know, kind of a little side note, I mean, it is a point in case in that one of the problems right now overall with all of the topics, no one wants to think very deeply about anything, actually. Truthfully, people do not want to think that deeply because thinking deeply about things is really fucking inconvenient. And, you know,
and disturbing.
It is disturbing. So, I mean, I'm put myself in that own camp because it's just like when you start to think deeply about things, it really hurts your fucking head because things are really fucking complicated. And even more so right now, that there aren't the easy solutions to things like we would like there to be. I mean, even another one that I didn't post about recently, but, you know, I love the idea of Tesla Motors. I love those little cars. They're so beautiful. I love the idea of what they're supposed to be doing for us. They don't actually do that.
No.
They're not actually the solution we want them to be, but we were, even myself included, because they're so sexy. And the idea is so sexy that, oh my God, we have a solution that's something that's better than the oil industry and all the old bullshit. But it's just moving the problem to a different part of the room. You know, we actually have massive amounts of issues, you know, coming down the pipeline with the Teslas because of they have to mine all that lithium, the cobalt. It's toxic. It's not actually sustainable. But, you know, it works in terms of a soundbite because it doesn't use fossil fuel. So, okay, it doesn't use fossil fuel, but then no one really looks at, well, how do we actually do all this battery thing? And
and the factories are using fossil fuels to manufacture them.
No, and the factory, the battery factory that they've created is run entirely on solar power. So they're doing some things right, but the batteries use lithium and cobalt and a whole bunch of other things that have to be mined, and they're not sustainable resources. I mean, they're not inexhaustible resources. So,
well, is a six-figure car our solution anyway? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, great, so a couple rich people can fix it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not holistic. It's still from that very, very narrow, consumptive branding, marketing angle perspective that's gotten us into this mess.
Well,
you know, that's sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. And like, even if we just took, you know, Elon Musk's, you know, game plan at face value, that the idea is you start with the luxury cars, even if we just believe that, okay, then we go to those more affordable cars, it still uses those lithium batteries. It doesn't, I mean, it creates new problems. It solves one, but creates new ones. Even if they were affordable, it's still problematic. And we're on a real side note off our topic here.
But it is all the same topic, essentially. It's patriarchy. It's like, it's
Right.
this mindset, this like overblown masculine distortion that's out of control.
Yeah, and there is, I think one of the things is, you know, maybe not as a gender thing, but as an energetic thing. You know, the shadow masculine is short-sighted and not community oriented. You know, it's not thinking of like what is the best interest of the tribe, but what's in the best interest of me. What can I get for myself? Because you think of like these sexual situations. It's like, what can I get right now? Damn the consequences, right?
Right.
Damn the consequences for the other person, but also for yourself. And, you know, there are people who have continuously gotten what they wanted in a short-term kind of grab what I can get kind of way. And then now it's kind of biting them on the ass. But collectively, the shadow masculine in the form of patriarchy has put us in a position where we as a society have gone for what is convenient, what we want right now. And the consequences are that we're destroying the earth we live on and the resources we depend on to live, let alone all the destruction we're doing to all the other creatures and living beings in this system. I mean, it's a disease. I mean, you know, and we're all infected by it to one degree or another, and we have to live within that disease structure. I mean, this sexual part of it is one of the things that's going on. And, you know, this is not a very hopeful conversation, you know. I'm not feeling like really, no, but.
Well, I think it's hopeful because we're not at each other's throats. And I don't think you're the bad guy and I don't feel like I'm the good guy. And I think just even modeling that and modeling that we're both in a like, what the fuck
right.
is helpful because there's not that good, bad thing. There's not that
right.
like, you know, we're humans, we're trying to figure it out together.
Well, and I think this kind of then can go in a little different direction. I mean, what is the solution? And, you know, you're hinting at it there. It's like, okay, we're dialoguing. We're not seeing each other as the enemy. We're curious. We're open. We don't have to agree on all points. I mean, you know, you and I may agree a little more than some people do in general. But, you know, this is part of the solution, is to find common ground, you know, and to dialogue, you know, rather than just yell at each other.
Yeah, of course. And I do think part of the solution is to look objectively at culture beyond just like what.
Oh. I think you might have turned off your microphone. So we have lost our microphone is not working. Oh, you're back. Okay, I think you disconnected yourself.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Let's try it like this. I think part of it is to, like, as Americans, we've been really identified with our independence and our freedom of expression. And, you know, I don't think the solution, as I said, is burqas, and I don't think the solution is like women covering up. There are too many other aspects. But I do think there's a piece of us stepping back and really looking objectively at like what's working and what isn't working. And I do think that the way that like Madison Avenue is using women's bodies to sell products isn't working. It's not serving men. It's not serving women. I think there is an overstimulation there. I think there is women not realizing there are consequences. Like my writing partner and I, we work in Venice, and we were at the canals a couple weeks ago brainstorming, and this girl walked by wearing super short shorts that were like cut above the curve of her ass. And she had like this beautiful ass and like these athletic legs, and it was distracting. And my attention went to her body and I saw myself sexualizing her and getting lost from my conversation. But the thing is, this girl was like 11 or 12. Like, this was a child.
Right.
And so after she walked away, I asked my writing partner, who, similar to you, very awake, has done a lot of work. And I was like, I just had a whole thing with that. Did you have that? And he had his own version of seeing the urge and seeing how far he'd come. And the point was is that the power of that image, of those exposed parts, pulled our attention and had a biological reaction. And is that serving anyone? Like,
Right.
who does it serve to have a tween walking around presenting herself in such a way that's inviting that type of internal conversation, just to come back to center? And what's that doing on a grand scale? And I know this isn't a sexy conversation to talk about women covering up to help the situation, but we do need to start making some shifts to our culture. And again, this is just one tiny piece. This isn't the solution.
Right.
But like with the web porn and the mass ED, I think we've taken it too far and it's not working. And we need to pendulate back into center in so many different ways. And as women, it's like, why is my empowerment based on how much tits and ass I can show? What is that?
So one of the things that popped up, as you were sharing all of that, is one of the central problems in all of this is really objectification, not in the narrow sense, but because objectification is a process whereby we make something into a means to an end. It's a thing. It has no life of its own or meaning of its own. It only has meaning for what we can get out of it. So, looking at a tree and going, well, I can cut it down and turn it into paper and sell it and make money. That's an objectification.
Completely.
So we generally think of that as being like a sexual thing. We look at, particularly when it's about women, but objectifying, dehumanizes it. That's something that patriarchy has, as a structure, is built on. Is even in the meat industry, we don't think of them as sentient beings. We think of them as product, right? But even with young girls, there's a prevalence in the fashion industry to use very young girls for adult products. They objectify them, and they're a means to an end to draw attention. But it's in every area. Objectification is happening.
It's all the time. It's every bus bench. It's every billboard. It's everywhere so much. And that's the problem, is how normalized it's become, when in fact, when I talk to men, they admit to me how distracting it is and how it really does. As a woman, I don't see a beautiful man and my genitals are on fire, right? I might start fantasizing in different mental constructs about relational aspects. For me, also, I'm not a Scorpio. It's not going down there. But I know for men, it does. It brings that energy online. And then all of a sudden, there's a fragmentation of where to focus the attention and what's appropriate. And it's is this helping us right now? Is continuing to stimulate this response helping with all of the crazy X factors we're dealing with, this perfect storm of ginormous apocalyptic, potentially scary things? Do we really need to keep poking this one thing to keep this particular means of expression and engaging online, when there's so many things we really would be wise to focus on and course correct?
Well, that's an excellent point, because we are in dire straits as a species. Even when we talk about, altruistically wanting to save the world, it really isn't the world we're concerned about. We may not make it, It's not a popular topic to actually look at, that we are so far into the end stages of the 6 cycles of civilization. There's not an empire in the world that has ever survived beyond 250 years, if you look at it historically, and we're in the end stage.
Yes, and at the same time, the species is mutating. So, like, because this incredible amount of novelty is coming online. So everything is true, and there's the possibility to go 5D. Well,
and that, I mean, you and I get what you're saying here. I mean, I understand this part of the dialogue. I think a lot of people might not even understand what you just said. But so if you would, I'll just translate that a little bit. I mean, this is like, if you look at the theory of entropy, I mean, when an open system begins to break down, it has the possibility to actually reorder into a higher order. When it's breaking down, it is a fucking shitstorm. But we're not a closed system. We do have the ability to take this chaos and look at all the things that are breaking down and reorder it into better systems. But so many people are busy trying to hold on to the pieces of what's falling apart. Yeah. Whether that's, we're looking at that with, gender politics, right? Gender identity, politics, everything is falling apart. But and this is it's a scary but potent time. And I think your point about, like, what are we focusing on is a very important one, because there's a lot of stuff that's being focused on that is a huge distraction from what could really be focused on and what we could be creating, and looking at what we should be creating next. I mean, you have a political system that is so far gone that, trying to vote in the right person for a structure that is collapsing. I mean, maybe one of the upsides of having Trump is that we see how ridiculous it is. It wasn't ridiculous because of him. It's just more obvious to more people that how ridiculous it is.
Right.
And it's such a farce, right? But
that's what metoo is. Like, metoo is that distraction, and not to get too conspiracy theory on it, but like, it erupted at the same time as all this footage started to emerge showing shooters on the ground at Vegas. And there were these 7 fires that started inexplicably at the same time in Northern California. And there's Puerto Rico, and there are these weird sort of like no grants for hurricane victims in Texas if you support boycotts of Israel. And like, there are all these weird things that you would think would attract more attention / outrage / dare to dream revolution. But instead, it's like everyone's really pissed off about the ass grabbing, and it's not to diminish the healing that's emerging from it.
Right.
But it is like, do we not have more important things to talk? I keep feeling like Game of Thrones, like, winter is coming. That's great that like someone grabbed your ass and it bummed you out, and that's also real. But we have an army of the dead like bearing down upon us at warp speed. Can we bookmark this until like protect some basic constitutional freedoms and get ourselves a little more stable ground? Well,
and just to call out a certain pink elephant in the room, I wouldn't have said what you just said as a man. Like, I mean, this is where a bit of the opportunity to have this dialogue where there's a balance, with the feminine and masculine. It's hard to make valid points when things are so sensitive.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to make that point. Thank you for making that point. But it's a theme that's come up for me recently is the theme of what is necessary. What is really needed? Like the expedience of what do you focus on when shit is hitting the fan? And I think, the thing with conspiracies is that there's just so many of them that, like, which one do you even focus on? Which one's true? Like, that becomes a distraction, can become a distraction too. because it's really hard to make sense of, like,
Right.
what is true. And I think part of the thing that, is happening right now, whether it is a consequence of, a potent time of collapse and opportunity, or whether it's conspiracy, there is this opportunity to decide, like, what are you going to focus on as most important out of all of the things? What are you going to focus on? Because there's a paralysis that happens, like, just even jumping back to the issue of, like, boys are being introduced to absolute infinite novelty with access to, beautiful naked bodies and whatever version of that they want, or naked male bodies. How do you choose when you can choose anything, right? Like so many people talk about romance being dead. Well, when you have infinite choices, how do you choose one? And, there's a teacher of mine that actually talked about that true choice isn't choice, because when you know what's important, there's one thing that's important and there are no other choices. Now, that ability, that discernment, that ability to know that, not even just in the field of romance, or choosing a sexual partner, but, like, what is the one important thing? And when you know what that one important thing is, it could be in a moment, in this moment, what is the most important thing? There literally are no other choices, but we live in a world that gives us the illusion that more choices is better, just to have the opportunity. You talked about Tinder. There's a phenomenon on Tinder where people swipe and then they get all these matches and then they don't do anything about it. They literally just want to know they have the option and then they don't do anything about it.
Right, because it's about the dopamine. It's not about connection or...
Yeah, it's the illusion of choice. I have all these options and none of it's satisfying. But the one, like, when you know one thing, like, it's so beautiful to watch friends who, like, find that one and they're like, there's no other one for them than this one. That's awesome, because it's the end of choices, actually, right?
So much of that has to do with, like, and I want to say, when I'm talking about healthy masculine and unhealthy masculine, healthy feminine and unhealthy feminine, I'm talking about larger energetics. I'm not talking about and women. And I know that you know that. But that's, like, the healthy masculine is, like, well, what do you want? What's the vision? What's the mission? And then how do I take from this delightful 21st century plethora of choices and make my best choice for this larger thing?
Right.
But you have this distortion where there isn't a larger thing. It's not about, a healthy, sustainable, conscious relationship. It's about ego gratification and penis tingles and more and new and different. And that's kind of what's going on with this ridiculous left, right, fake divide. Infighting is like, well, we don't have a vision of the better future. And when you ask what is the solution is like, let's stop fighting about these little, like, I don't want to diminish them and reduce them to trivialities, but in the grand scheme, I really think that they are. And what is the vision for the future? What do we want to create? And then we can make choices from there that either, well, does this choice fuel this vision or does this choice take away? But without that larger vision, goal, I want a relationship, I wanted this, I wanted that, then it's just like distraction and indulgence and, wrong use of our technology and all of those things. I think it's like this larger clarity that we're lacking. And for us as a civilization, like, well, what is the better version of our culture look like? What do we want to build? What are we living into? And are these things helping that?
It's, in this day and age, it's hard to focus. It really is truly hard to focus. There's so much stimulus on all fronts that I think people's ability to choose is greatly diminished. And so even having that bigger overview of, like, what is a more sustainable, valuable goal to be focused at, I don't think people can actually focus anymore. That the way they used to. So it's just so much harder these days.
I you and I think that's our permeant event. Like the surrendering of our attention looks like it's shaping up to be our demise. And I mean, if we really want to go cuckoo, that's like the AI, technological singularity conversation. I don't want to take us there.
How do I know you're real and not a robot?
You
Dani?
don't.
If that's your real name, how would I know? Because technology is at such a level that you're a great array of pixels on a screen. You look very alive.
Totally. This actually took me out 6 months ago, and I'm being simulated so that people think that I still exist.
That's awesome. It's good work, whoever. But I mean, even and we're so left field here, but we're trying to make sense of Me Too. I don't know if we are, but we're exploring the topics and the topics around it, the bigger picture. This feels really open-ended, but it's an open dialogue, and we've gone an hour. We haven't solved anything, but we've explored a whole bunch. And I think I'm going to kind of circle back to what you had said in terms of you had said this going into this dialogue, and you said it during the dialogue, that here we are, male, female, masculine, feminine. We're conversing, we're exploring. We haven't said bad words about each other. Well done. in this day and age, that's an accomplishment. We'll do up a plaque for you, and we'll send it in the mail. Congratulations, well done. But I think it's worth having the dialogue, and I think okay. I'd love to hear your takeaway. My takeaway overall is that we need to figure out what the hell is important. And we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we do have a lot of work to do. I think my takeaway is that, which I've already stated, is like I'm concerned about half the population being silenced right now. And the bit that I said a little while ago, that you said that you were glad that I said that, because given the current social climate, you can't say that scares me, because I know that you, among, a lot of people, are an incredibly wise, intelligent, valuable, sane voice. And I think that if it's so volatile that our smartest men are afraid to speak the truth, we're off. I think we need to make an adjustment so that we can hear one another and allow one another a platform and be able to say whatever we want to say.
Well, I mean, thank you. But it does feel a little bit like being on the sinking Titanic, and there's a very lively but incredibly useless dialogue going on in the dining hall. So it is like what I'm actually most afraid of. I mean, just to clarify, in the big picture, I'm really not most afraid of the fray of this dialogue. There are much bigger, more dangerous issues at foot for humanity. So, there are much worse things to be afraid of than this.
Yeah.
And I would love for people to, it's not that the issues at hand aren't incredibly important, incredibly sensitive, and part of the bigger story. But if we can't get along, if we can't find a way to coexist and communicate, these other bigger issues are just going to overwhelm us. So then that's it. It's like humanity is at its very edge of its ability to function and continue. Most people don't want to look at that, and so there is a lot of distraction.
Yeah,
but I do think, just to kind of tie it into a positive. If men and women and the divine feminine and the masculine, the sacred masculine, if we can, come from a higher place and understand each other in a new way and work together in a new way and create something beyond the patriarchy, not a return to something older, but like something together, maybe then we would have a possibility of not only solving this issue of like the horrific conduct that we're seeing exposed, sexual misconduct from, the milder to the horrific, right? But maybe we could solve the issue of whether we get to continue as a species and have a planet that we can survive on. Yeah. I mean, I'd love, that would be really like an awesome accomplishment if we could figure that out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think figuring that out takes all of us. And so, and that's kind of this piece right now. It's like, yeah, can we elevate this conversation? Can we come from a place of compassion and generosity with one another? And like what can we do to help one another? What can we do to heal this rift and come together and deal with the much bigger, more pressing issues like hasta pronto, like.
Yeah, and part of solving those bigger issues will involve how to heal the incredible trauma that so many have suffered because of patriarchy. And oh my God, this like, we didn't even really get into this, but you mentioned it earlier. But it was the issue that men have been harmed by patriarchy too, in different ways. And when you don't even look, when the dialogue is not even really looking at that men are damaged by trying to fit into this, or they've been conditioned and trained by this to behave a certain way or want certain things that they don't even know if they really want. I mean, that's, sad unto itself, oh God, we got a lot of work to do.
I know, a lot of work to do.
but thank you for dialoguing with me on this. Thank you for suggesting this topic. And I hadn't done these dialogues so much the last couple of months, so I back up and running. There are some other people who want to do dialogues on other topics, but you jump started it for me, so thank you. And hopefully this will become a weekly thing again. And there are so many topics to cover. So Dani Katz, author extraordinaire, artist, quantum languaging expert, and so many other things, and wonderful person, wonderful woman, dear friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, have a great night, and we will end this broadcast, and we will see what kind of comments there are, what happens. Oops. Uh-oh. Okay, take care. Bye.